Welcome back to the Passing Through podcast. I am recording this episode from Wrocław, Poland, but I don't know where I will actually be at the time that it's released. I suspect I could be passing through Berlin, could be somewhere else in Poland, might even be in the Czech Republic, or Belgium, or Hungary, or who knows where. In the interest of preserving the mystery, and maybe even increasing it, I'm going to include some background nature sounds that I had recorded in Portugal while we were there, to give you a sense of places that we have been, since I'm already telling you right now where I'm recording this and where I might be in the future. It seems sensible to include places from the past. So you are going to hear sounds which were recorded, I think, on the westernmost point of the European continent, in Portugal, at a place called Cabo de Roca. So enjoy those soothing background sounds. This episode is going to be one that focuses on storytelling. I don't claim to be an expert storyteller, but I do enjoy telling stories, and I think that that's probably the most foundational requirement of storytelling. So I'm going to tell you a story that I've been meaning to tell. It's a story that I told last night, and I realized that in its telling, it's something that wants to be told. My friends that I was with, when I told it to them, I could see their faces light up. They were really interested in the story, and as I told it, I wasn't quite sure if they would be interested in the story because the topic and the subject matter are a bit odd, definitely a little bit woo to some audiences. So I wasn't sure how they were receiving it. I was hopeful that the expressions I saw on their faces were genuine joy, amusement, and satisfaction. By the time I was done telling the story, it had opened up the conversational space to invite sharing from them, and they told me stories that they had never told me, and it allowed for a really deep, connective exchange. And this is one of the benefits of storytelling, in my opinion. It's not just a way to pass down information, share wisdom, knowledge, connect with someone about shared experiences, but it's more of a ritual. It's more of a dance that actually remakes the space as it's happening. You can feel the container shifting and morphing and bending and distorting as the air vibrates, and it invites interesting thought or inspires ideas or triggers memories, not just in the people hearing the story, but even in me as the teller. I was noticing that new pathways and more novel ideas were floating across my mind as I was speaking. In fact, it's actually a story I almost told Bayo Kumalafe in a previous episode, but I suspected that it might take 5 or 10 minutes to tell, as it probably did last night. And in episodes where I invite a guest onto my show, where these are people that I feel have important stories to tell themselves, I always feel a good bit of reservation and apprehension to share long stories, even though in my own life, in my own friend circles, speaking with them or with family, I do like to tell long stories, because I think some stories need that space to breathe. they need to establish a sense of rhythm and pace. And if you try to compress something like that down and confine it into a space that it doesn't fit into, and rush it out and hurry it and speed it along, it kind of collapses and it doesn't have the space it needs to dance and flourish and transform. So, in the hopes of providing a space for the story here, I am going to tell a story about a recent experience that I had in Portugal, in Porto, where my partner Asha and I went on a brief port wine tasting excursion. And the premise of this story, when I told it last night, was I was explaining why I believe it is that things are alive in an animist sense. So in the episode title, I've put in parentheses, animated grapes. Doesn't have to be the title of this story. The story doesn't have a title. But if you're looking to know what the story is going to be about and have a sneak peek about what it is before I start speaking, then there you go. There's a dog barking in the background, as is a prerequisite when I'm recording almost any podcast lately. So I will understand this to mean that this episode is blessed and that dog is singing praises and congratulating me and you as the listener in partaking of this ancient human tradition of telling story, right? Because our unique ability as humans is that we have a voice, right? And what I mean by that isn't that we can vibrate the air with our voice, because the dog in the background was just doing that. The birds do that in the morning when they greet the sun. The leaves do that as they rustle when the wind moves through them. The water does that as it rushes and gurgles along. So plenty of things have voice all around us. But what's unique to humans is that we have language, and this language allows us to express complex ideas to one another. And with the advent of technologies that allow these kind of conversations and forms of speech to be captured and recorded, like what's happening now as you're listening to this episode, it allows us to encase these things in time, out of time even. Paradoxically, both are happening at the same time. But we take this language and we take this tool that we have and we can tell story. We can communicate. We can sing each other praises. We can express gratitude for all of the abundance around us. It's a unique skill that humans have. And in some wisdom traditions, they say that this is our gift, and as our gift, it is also our obligation. And I believe everything is alive. I believe that even the story is alive, and that our voice, our ability to use language, is an earth intelligence. And what does that mean? What do I mean by that? Well, when I was speaking last night, this is one of these novel ideas that came to me when I was describing humans as extensions of the earth. And not just humans, right? Everything that is on the earth is an extension of the earth itself. You know, if we believe that the earth itself is alive, which I do, the earth is an organism, then everything that's on the earth is born of that organism. So for an example, I was talking about mushrooms, and I was like, aren't people like mushrooms? Kind of a weird statement. It's not immediately obvious what that means, but to me, if you think of a mushroom, they call a mushroom a fruit body. So a mushroom isn't a thing that exists independently by itself, right? It's connected to a thing, just like an apple or a pear or a lemon or an orange or a walnut doesn't exist on its own. It grows on another organism. The apple grows on a tree, just like the lemon, the orange, the pear, the nut. And in the same way, a mushroom is doing the same thing, right? There is a dense mycelial network that spreads itself through the soil. And that network interacts with other organisms in the soil, right? It's in relationship. There's a beautiful interconnectivity that's happening there, because it's not just a mycelial web spreading through the soil, it's interacting with the soil, right? It's wrapping itself around tree roots. It's interacting with microorganisms, with things that have fallen into the soil and are in a process of decay and decomposition. There are mycorrhizal energy exchanges where nutrients and minerals are being passed through them. So there's this really beautiful network of life that's happening through these dense mycelial connections and relationships. And through those relationships, up and out of them, sprouts the fruit body that we call a mushroom. Just as I said before, as the apple comes from the tree. Once you pluck that mushroom up out of the mycelium, it's disconnected, right? And we see this as an independent thing. It's a solitary mushroom. In the same way that if we have a single apple or a basket of apples, we see them as something separate from the tree. And in a sense, they are. They're simultaneously separate, but also deeply dependent and connected and part of the tree, or part of the mycelial network in the case of the mushroom. And so I was saying that humans then function much the same way. Humans and trees and birds and snakes and bears and lions and eagles. Any creature, anything, and I believe also rivers, mountains, wind currents, oceans, seas, all of these things have this in common. And when I was speaking to my friends last night, rightfully so, they kind of objected, well, isn't that weird to say that all these things have this kind of agency or consciousness or life in them, because they don't have nervous systems, they don't have minds. So how can they be conscious? And to me, I think that mind is our unique human consciousness. And some thinkers think that it's not even uniquely human. Some would say that that comes from this dance that we do with everything all around us. That you can't have mind without air. You can't have air without the ocean. You can't have, or the trees. That everything is connected and everything's participating and exchanging information. And this dance, this dialogue that's happening gives rise to mind, which is an interesting way of thinking about things. And I think that there's definitely credibility in that line of thinking. But to me, I would go even simpler and just say, well, the grape, which is going to be the topic of this discussion here, this is all preamble before the story. Sorry for that, but I'm trying to set the stage a little bit before we jump into it. And the grape knows certain things, right? Like the grape knows sun. It knows sunlight. It needs sunlight. Grape knows about water. Grape could understand heat and cold and frost. The grape has a certain awareness and intimacy. It knows how to receive nutrients from the soil up through the plant, the vine that it's on. So the grape has a certain level of awareness, and it's different than a human level of awareness, but it needn't be hierarchical. We don't need to esteem humans above the grape, right? We are both extensions of the earth. And so that was kind of one of the premises of the story. And the case that I was making by telling it was that, I think that because of this experience I had in Portugal, it confirmed a belief that I have that there is spirit, there is life, there is animacy in all things all around us. But it actually wasn't the first time that I thought that. The first time that I thought that, interestingly enough, was in relationship to mushrooms. Psychedelic. the mushrooms that I had been growing in my apartment as an experiment. And it was funny because these mushrooms, I had been doing everything right that I was supposed to do. I was keeping my hands sanitized and gloved. I was keeping them in the proper location, controlling the humidity, watering them, and nothing was happening. And so I was fearful that maybe what I had was a bad batch, that the substrate hadn't properly been colonized, or something was wrong. Maybe they were exposed to improper temperature, they were old. Whatever the case, it seemed that nothing was happening. And I remember going to sleep one night. The mushrooms weren't too far from my bedside. And in my dreams, I dreamt that the mushrooms sprouted, that a bunch of them, there was just this flush of mushrooms that came up out of the substrate, and that they were watching me sleep. It was a weird dream, but I had the distinct feeling that I was being watched by something that was conscious, by something that had awareness. And in the dream, I understood that they were curious about me. And obviously, in the dream world, we're in this liminal space where we're on the threshold of wakefulness, normal consciousness, and something else, something much more mysterious, something that we don't really understand, right? Isn't it weird that we spend a third of our lives asleep and we don't really know what's happening? Sure, we know what's happening from a scientific perspective, kind of. We know that healing happens. We know that emotional trauma is processed during sleep. We know that learning happens when we're sleeping. But those are things that we know, in quotation marks. There's tons of stuff that we don't know, like the content of our dreams. Where does that come from? Some people, scientific materialists, might argue that those are just the random firing of synapses and they have no meaning at all, that our brains just create narrative out of nothing because that's what they do. We seek patterns, and even when they're not there, we seek to construct them and reconstruct them and assign meaning to them. And sure, that's a plausible, possible way to think about things, but to me that's a little bit incomplete. It sounds like a partial truth at best. And so to me, dreams are full of mystery. Dreams are full of power. In some spiritual traditions, our dreams are the soul's way of communicating with us and trying to get us to discover our path. So that to me seems equally plausible and viable to the scientific materialist perspective. But anyway, dreams, my point there is that dreams, I'm almost 40. I've spent 10 years of my life asleep. That is not a inconsequential amount of time. So there has always been something and will always be something fascinating to me about sleep and dreaming. And in this dream, as you notice, I'm making some wide circles here because I'm giving space. I'm kind of throwing this linguistic lasso around and seeing what I can catch hold of. In this dream, these mushrooms I understood not through language, not through normal methods of knowing or understanding, but something more ancient, maybe something more ineffable. And what I understood that these mushrooms were doing is that they were curious about me and wanted to take me. Usually we say we want to take mushrooms, but I understood that they want to take me. And it was a very weird experience because I was kind of objectified in this way. And it made me realize, I'm kind of objectifying the mushrooms when I'm thinking them as just a substance to take, as though they don't have an agency of their own, as though they don't also take me when I take them. And I remember waking up, and of course, this dream was very powerful, so I immediately looked to my left, and to my shock, horror, awe, and wonder, I saw that the mushrooms had actually fucking sprouted up out of the substrate, and there was an entire flush of them standing there, looking back at me. And so somehow, inconceivably, seemingly impossibly, this dream, there was something, I mean, I don't know, right? Could that be coincidence? Perhaps. Like, of course, I'm open to the idea that that could be a coincidence, but to me, that seems a little too eerie, a little too specific, a little too intense, a little too strange. And I think the dog in the background agrees. So that's the preamble for the story I'm about to tell. And those things kind of came up. I was weaving those in as I told the story last night. I don't remember what the order was, but the way the story unfolded was that I was making the argument. Maybe making the argument isn't the right word. I was sharing a story. I was providing context for people on why I think things are alive. And I said the first time I actually had that experience, this kind of enchanted, magical experience with the mushrooms, quite literally magic mushrooms, was the first time I started to say, actually, there's something at play here that is far more mysterious than science has been able to account for so far. And so I said, building on that experience was this experience that I had in Porto. And it was a day just like any other day. Asha and I were there. We were living in the van. We were exploring the city piece by piece, kind of moving with the sun. If it was a nice day, we would go for a walk. And on this day, we went for a walk along a body of water that's moving through the city. And we passed over a bridge. And once you pass that bridge and you get to the other side, there are a series of caves, they call them. They're basically wineries that are built into something like a cave. Maybe some of them at one point were literal caves, but now it's more like you're in a stone house kind of place, or a big stone room. And you can taste the wines. And for those of you who don't know what port wine is, it's a sweet wine. Usually you'll have it paired with a dessert in a fancy restaurant or something like that. That's when I've had it in the past, back in San Francisco. And they're sweet, but they're also pretty potent. They're pretty strong. Little magic potions, right? And I've only ever had red port wine. Pairs really nice with like a cheesecake or some kind of ice cream dessert. And it's actually pretty nice. It's just not something I ever crave or think to have. But on this particular day, we walked into this particular place. And the reason we chose this place was because there were two crows outside. The winery was called Two Crows, or Crows. And nearby there were a pair of crows. So I thought this is an auspicious sign. Let's enter and see what's up. So we go in. And I wasn't really in the mood to do a tasting. It was expensive. You have to sit down at a table with other people and have a long conversation. And I wanted it to be more casual and informal and quick. Because at that time, Asha wasn't drinking. She was fasting, so she wasn't even eating. And I didn't want to be stuck there for a long time because I felt like this would be a little bit rude towards Asha. So I decided I was just going to have one drink. And I was looking down at the menu. And for some reason, I don't know why, under normal circumstances, this would never be a thing that I do. But something called to me. One of the wines was just jumping out at me. And it was a white port wine. And it was one of the more pricey ones. And this is why I say I normally wouldn't do that, because I don't feel the need to spend money on a fancy wine. Especially because I'm not working and I'm effectively homeless living in a van right now. I have no source of income, so I don't need to spend 20 euros on a glass of wine. A taste of a glass of wine, because the servings of port wine are rather small. But somehow I felt I needed to try this wine. It didn't feel like it was my choice at that point. None of the other wines on the menu seemed enticing or interesting to me at all, except this 40-year-old white port wine. So I ordered the wine, and I'm waiting for it to come. And the woman, when I ordered it, seemed a little bit taken aback that I ordered that one, because I think that was even the cost of a tasting, was 20 euros. So you could get 3 normal wines, and I was effectively getting this one wine for the cost of 3. So I think she was a little bit surprised to see that. But of course, she didn't object. She went to get the wine, and when she brought it back, I noticed immediately that the wine wasn't actually white. And I looked at her like she had made a mistake because she must have seen the confusion on my face. And she said, "Ah, you're noticing that it's not white. Is this the first time that you've had a port wine this old?" And I said, "Yeah." And it seemed like she thought for a moment to interject and give me some coaching and tell me a little bit about the wine and what I should expect, maybe describe the flavor profile. And then I noticed something in her kind of pulled back and decided not to. And I'm really thankful for that because I think she understood that she wanted me to have my own experience. That was some wisdom on her part. She was an older woman, and I'm very gracious that she did that. Because the first thing I did was notice its color. And its color was amber. It wasn't quite red. It wasn't quite white. It was something in between. And it was a little bit cloudy. It didn't have the clarity you'd expect with a white wine. It had a certain kind of density to it and a hazy color. And I noticed when I swirled the wine around a little bit in the glass that the legs of the wine, the pieces of it that kind of slide down the side of the glass to connect to the rest of the wine at the bottom, moved very slowly. And I thought that was pretty interesting too. And the smell on it, when I rose it to my nose, had a ferocious kind of bite to it, right? It was like whiskey. It was like barking at my nose. It had this bite to it, and I was just like, wow, I don't like whiskey, actually. I know for some listeners that is sacrilege, but it's not really my favorite drink. It's harsh, it's abrasive. There's not much that's pleasant about drinking it. Maybe there are 40-year-old whiskeys or older that are delicious, and I haven't been brought into the fold. Totally open to that, but so far in my life, I'm not a huge fan of whiskey. So immediately I started to wonder if this was perhaps a mistake that I chose this wine. But what was interesting to me, the concept, was that it was already strange. The smell was really potent and not what I expected. The color wasn't what I expected. Realizing that in my life I have never consumed something, especially a liquid, that was older than me. Just that idea that I was there and there was something that I was about to drink that had been alive longer than I have. It was strange. And there was something strange already happening because these ideas were swirling around me. And as soon as I raised the glass to my lips and the wine touched my tongue, my whole body just seemed to explode. A wash of sensation just passed from the front of my skull to the back and shot down my spine. My entire mouth, it felt like the wine had spilled itself over my tongue and was just rubbing and pressing against each taste bud in my mouth. It was this intense flavor of complexity. My eyes must have lit up because Asha looked at me and said, "Oh my, like what is it like? What's happening?" And I had a difficult to explain sense of emotions and feelings, and it just came out. I just was laughing, and I said, like, "Oh my God, it's alive! Like I don't know how else to describe it, but it's alive." And I understood, like I understood with the mushrooms, that it was trying to tell something to me. It was communicating with me. Because when I thought about it, I said, not only is it alive, but it's been alive since before it was even a grape, right? Because the vines that the grapes are growing on, they stay, right? Have you ever seen a vineyard in the winter without any grapes on them? They're like little trees, right? They're there. And so the age of that vine contributes to the flavor of the grape, I would assume. I mean, I'm just making an assumption here. But not just that, the temperature fluctuations. What happened in time as that grape was forming over that year? Was there a fire nearby? Maybe it added a smokiness to the flavor. Was it particularly sunny? Maybe this produced more sweetness in the grape. Was it especially dry or wet? All of these things matter, right? Like what was in the soil at that time? So I was thinking, wow, so many factors went in to the growth and life of this grape when it was alive, but it didn't really quite die, right? Just as we don't die when we're dead. It's not like our biological process is over, right? When we die and we're in the ground, we're slowly decomposing. Microorganisms, fungi, insects, time, it's breaking us down. And so we're still in dialogue with things that are alive, right? We are in this interplay, this exchange is happening. Life continues. Life consumes life. And so the same is true with this grape. It's in the barrel, it's in this wooden enclosure, and things are happening. It's fermenting slowly over time, over 40 years, 4 decades. It's in this barrel, undergoing change, producing alcohol, sugar, eating sugar. There's a connection between the wood and the grape. And I was understanding all of this as I tasted it. I understood the complexity, but I understood something much more than complexity. I understood that there was a yearning in the grape. And this was the strangest part. Just like those mushrooms that were growing in my dream, the grape wanted to be tasted. It's a weird thing to explain, and I don't know how else I could explain it except that that's what I knew. And I knew it in the way, with the intensity that it pressed itself against, my taste organs. I understood that, wow, this has been stuck in a cage, in a wooden cage for 4 decades, wanting to have this interaction, that this was some sort of consummation for the grape. And I could feel this with the quantity or the amount of saliva that my mouth was producing to greet this grape. I could have sat there with my mouth open and saliva would have been pouring out of my fucking mouth like a waterfall. Like it was just gushing with saliva to dance with these grapes that were in my mouth. And there was something joyous about it. There was something ecstatic. There was something, I don't know. It was incredible. And it's a weird thing to say. It's hard to describe if you weren't there to taste it. But I understood that, yeah, this is a sort of reciprocity that's happening now, where my body is in contact with its body, and not just its body, right? The body of the wood, which is also alive and interacting with that grape when it's in the barrel. It's not just that the grape and the alcohol is seeping into the wood and making it sweet and coating it and giving it this kind of desirable flavoring that affects the subsequent wines that will go into it. But the wine is also pulling in elements of the wood. I tasted a nuttiness. There was something nutty about it, in addition to the fruitiness of the grape and the sweetness and the smokiness and all of the complexity. I was in dialogue with the grape. It was whispering secrets to me. And at the same time, I understood that it wasn't just the grape that was telling me something. It was also time. And that's where things get a little bit more weird and a little more abstract, because time is present in everything, right? We are passing through time and space. And I realized that much like the grapes that were in that barrel, had been passing through time for nearly 40 years as well. And that both of us were undergoing complexification through time. In the case of the grape, it was turning from white more towards red. It was going from clear to more opaque and hazy and cloudy. It was going from maybe a kind of sweet, simple taste to what I was tasting as I was drinking it. And I understood that myself too. I was going through changes over these 40 years that were similar. And it was this beautifully connective realization and understanding and conversation that I was having with the wine. But time kind of emerged and made itself present and said, but there is also me. You need to recognize my contribution here, that this doesn't happen independently of me, that I am deeply interwoven in all happenings. And time seemed to whisper that, yeah, what I do is I complexify things. And I understood this viscerally. And I said, wow, yeah, that seems to be the case in my observation. And then, as if to employ some kind of trickster device, it paused and it said, but only to a point. Given enough time, I simplify everything. And this was the really mind-blowing part to me, because I had never thought of time in this context before. I never understood it as complexifier. And then it inverted that understanding playfully to say that it is also the great simplifier. You know, you continue any story long enough, and we have the eventual inevitable heat death of the universe, right? Our situation becomes more complex in life, and ultimately we perish. We die, we leave here. We have a simple end. All of our worries, all of our joys, all of our hopes, dreams, fears, pains, despairs, anguish, love. Ultimately, there's a simple resolution to all of that. We pass on, we pass through this life. So, being told this from an animate force through a grape, not just through a grape, right? As I mentioned before, it is through a deeply interconnected series of events, relationships. The grape and the wood, while they were alive, taking nutrients from the sun and soil and rain and wind and animals and whatever was decomposing in the soil, the humus of the soil, the nutrient profile, the microorganisms, the fungi, the people who were putting in their energy and time and love into maintaining the grapes, processing them, storing them, caring for them. All of the things that were happening around the grape in the barrel for 40 years. You know, the grapes were in the barrel before there was even internet. You know, I don't even think cell phones were a thing yet. Social media. There have been political upheavals. There have been species extinctions, temperature fluctuations, geological happenings, volcanic eruptions, weird temporal anomalies, decades of change, and even forces that we don't even know or understand, cosmic happenings. And all of this was just swirling around my head, and I couldn't really even believe it, that this could be communicated through something this old. I'm wondering, am I having some kind of psychotic break from taking 2 sips of a port wine? Am I suffering from delusions? You know, it was pretty special and strange and weird. And I was explaining all of this to Asha, and she was just kind of nodding and looking at me. And I was wondering the same thing that I was wondering last night as I was telling the story to my friends. Does this sound crazy? Does this sound insane? And maybe in a way it does. But in a way it sounds like the most normal, most obvious, most basic thing imaginable. But these encounters, these moments that we have, if we are open and receptive and listening to the stories that want to be told to us, these non-human stories, I think we can be in dialogue with things that don't use the same language that we use, right? Because this has happened to me twice, and maybe more times, that I have forgotten or didn't notice, didn't hear. And so I think all of us have this capacity We all have the ability to listen deeply and be open to these things if we allow ourselves to notice them, if we can extend personhood out into things that we normally wouldn't associate with conscious, animate being or personhood. So that's an interesting experiment for listeners to try. Maybe you have had similar experiences. Maybe you know what I'm talking about. If you're listening to this and you're going, this is super strange and I don't really know what to do with it. Well, to me, that sounds like an opportunity. And I mean, that's basically the story. Last night I told it with a bit more power. That's another component of stories and their telling, is that now I'm trying to kind of force the story. I'm summoning it. Last night it was passing through me. I didn't plan on telling that story. I had never told it before. And now I'm trying, it's more of a recounting the story, so it lacks that same level of aliveness that it had last night. But I think the meat is still there. The takeaway is still there. But I can notice I didn't have as much fun in the telling. And that's another interesting thing. You know, again, that's time, right? These stories exist in time. So when I'm trying to force it this time, it becomes performative instead of authentic. And maybe maybe those aren't the right words to describe it, because nothing inauthentic is there, but it is, yeah. So let me refine that. So telling the story on command here invites a kind of performative, it invites the story to appear in a performative fashion instead of a collaborative one. And I think that's the difference. Telling the story for the first time, or telling the story where it feels like it's passing through you, feels a bit different. And yeah, after telling the story last night, it was funny to watch the space kind of unfurl and deepen and open up and invite similar sharing. And it was really nice. It was one of the more special conversational spaces that I've been in a while. So I was really grateful for the story, for giving that gift. And there's a bunch of other stuff I wanted to talk about, things that are kind of popping into my head right now, particularly about the political situation in the States with Trump and the crises in the world, Ukraine and Gaza. But I don't really know what to say about those things. I don't know what I can say, what I can offer that might be helpful to someone. A lot of my friends back home, I think a lot of people right now are stressed, they're scared, they're worried, they're nervous. And rightly so. And I think that's okay. I don't think we need to run from those feelings. I think acknowledging them, maybe grieving a bit, feeling some anger, getting in touch with what's there could be helpful. I don't think I have any unique analysis or special insights to offer. It seems like there's a lot of that going around these days, and maybe what we need is to get more in touch with ourselves and each other. To me, that seems like that's a pretty potent antidote. In fact, I was in Berlin recently with Asha and a few other friends, and we saw Douglas Rushkoff, who was there doing a book signing. And one of the people in the crowd asked him a similar question. They were wondering, what do we do in the face of all of these crises, in the face of mounting political instability, political persecution, rights being stripped away, the erosion of what's left of democracy? And that's a pretty big question, right? I don't know if asking anyone that question at a book signing is going to yield a comprehensive answer, but what Douglas said was as good as an answer as I could think of. And so I'll share that with you. He said, well, maybe we don't have to do anything. Maybe that's not something for us to fix. What can we meaningfully do against that? What we can do is get in touch with those soft, gushy, human things. We can look into each other's eyes. We can make love. We can dance. We can sing. We can make art. We can come together as people. And that seems like a pretty good start to me. So that's something that I've been thinking about. And it's helped me feel good about the work that Asha and I are doing right now in terms of trying to build community, trying to connect, trying to create those spaces and those containers where people can be in an emergent process together, where we don't know what we're doing exactly, but we're there to help each other and try to figure it out and create a container of exploration, play, safety, and perhaps facilitate growth through that exploration. Because the other message, the other truth from the grape is that transformation is a constant, right? Everything is in a process of becoming. We like to think of ourselves as these separate, static, solitary things in time. But if you think of yourself as the grape, you realize that you aren't the same person that you were when you were a child, when you were an infant, when you were a teenager, a young adult. And you're not the same person that you're going to be as you approach middle age, as you get older, as you become elderly. And so being aware of that and being flexible and being open and try to move away from rigidity and ideas of static identity, I think this could be helpful in keeping you spiritually limber. I mean, I feel like I'm kind of preaching to myself right now because these are things that I hope to continue to do and practice and hold on to. But if transformation is the constant, then we shouldn't resist change. We shouldn't resist that movement through time. So, in the most charitable interpretation of the current political situation, not just in the States, but globally, because it seems like right-wing authoritarian fascism are on the rise, not just in the States. I mean, the States seems to have a unique brand of it right now, where you have a kind of techno-oligarchy, theocratic, right-wing evangelical Christian flavor, which is a little bit scarier than in other places. Or maybe scarier isn't the right word. Maybe it's just because it's the place that I'm from and the cultural, historical contexts and awarenesses that I have of that place that make it vibrate a little bit more unsettlingly in me. But maybe Trump and this ideology, is he just a symptom of this ideology, right? Maybe we can view that as a catalyst for capitalist collapse. Maybe that rotten fruit hanging off the limb of the tree is getting so heavy, so bloated, so full of toxicity that it will have to fall. It will implode because the actions, the behavior, the philosophy that underpins it cannot sustain itself for much longer, it seems. And maybe this will be the transformation that will mobilize us or function as an accelerant or catalyst for a transformation into a more beautiful world, into a world where we understand the importance of treating each other and the world around us with gratitude and respect, and just honoring the dignity of all sentient beings. I don't know. The other thing that the grape was giving me was alcohol. So everything that I'm saying has to be taken with a grain of salt, right? It's the drunken delusion of one too many glasses of port wine or a few too many hops. Some hop-headed, hopeful, hippie heroism. Right? I don't know. But something interesting to think about, I think. And part of me also acknowledges, of course, that even being able to say that comes from a position of privilege, right? Despite living in a van, despite not having any income, despite sacrificing a lot of my comforts and luxuries that I was used to that accompany modernity, I still have the choice to do that, right? I'm not under the same level of duress and stress that others are. And I acknowledge that. At the same time, this is the vantage point from which I experience reality, from which I encounter the world. At the same time, I hold reverence and I wish for and I want the best for people. And I guess that's just a different way of saying be good to one another.